On January 16, 1979, an 8-year-old girl was pulled out of a palace in Tehran and put on a plane. She did not understand where she was going. She did not understand why her father was crying on the tarmac in front of his own generals. She did not understand that she would never see her bedroom again, never walk through the gardens again, never come home again. She was Princess Leila Pahlavi, the youngest child of the last Shah of Iran. 22 years later, she was found dead and alone in a London hotel room at the age of 31, her body destroyed by years of starvation, 5 times the lethal dose of sleeping pills in her blood. She was not the only one the Exile killed. Her brother, Ali-Reza, a PhD student at Harvard who spent his life studying the ancient Persian civilization his family had been forbidden to return to, shot himself in his Boston apartment at 44. He had lived for years with the shades pulled down. His last wish was that his ashes be scattered in the Caspian Sea, the sea he grew up beside, the sea he was never allowed to touch again. Their mother, Empress Farah, is still alive. She is 87 years old. She lives alone in Paris. She has now spent more years in exile than she ever spent on the throne. She has buried her husband in Cairo, her daughter in Paris, and her son in a country that was not his own. And she says that if she closes her eyes, she can still smell the jasmine from the gardens at Niavaran Palace. 2 of her 4 children are dead. The other 2 have never recovered. This is the story of what the Iranian Revolution did not to a government or a dynasty, but to a mother and her children. To understand what those 4 children lost, you have to understand what they were born into and how completely it was taken. Farah Diba was not born into royalty. She was born on October 14, 1938, in Tehran, to a family that was comfortable but not wealthy. Her father, a military officer, died when she was young, and her mother raised her largely alone. She was a serious student, drawn to design and structure, and in her early 20s, she went to Paris to study architecture. It was there, at a reception at the Iranian embassy, that she was introduced to the Shah of Iran. He was 40, she was 21. They were married in December 1959, and within a year, Farah had done what 2 previous queens could not. She gave the Shah a son. Crown Prince Reza was born on October 31, 1960. The nation celebrated for days. Princess Farah followed in 1963, Prince Ali-Reza in 1966, and Princess Leila in 1970. 4 children in 10 years, raised inside the Niavaran Palace in northern Tehran, with private tutors, ski trips in the mountains, and summers on the Caspian coast. In 1967, the Shah crowned himself Shahanshah, King of Kings, and for the first time in modern Iranian history, he placed a crown on his wife's head as well. Farah became Shahbanu, Empress of Iran. She later said that the day she was crowned represented the crowning of every woman in her country. From the outside, the life was extraordinary. Farah built the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art, filling it with works by Picasso, Monet, Pollock, and Warhol, a collection now valued at nearly $3 billion. She founded Iran's first American-style university. She presided over 26 cultural, educational, and health organizations. She traveled to remote villages and met with families in parts of the country no member of the royal family had ever visited. She was, by many accounts, genuinely beloved. But the Shah's regime carried a darkness that Farah's cultural work could not conceal. The Savak secret police detained, tortured, and killed political dissidents. The rapid modernization of the White Revolution had alienated the country's powerful religious establishment. In 1971, the Shah staged a $250 million celebration at the ancient ruins of Persepolis to mark 2,500 years of Persian monarchy. World leaders attended. Ayatollah Khomeini, from exile in Iraq, called it an obscenity. The gap between the palace and the street was growing wider every year, and inside the palace, the children had no way of knowing it. They grew up believing the world they lived in was permanent. That is what palaces are designed to make you believe. On the morning of January 16, 1979, the Shah of Iran stood on the tarmac at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran. His wife was beside him. His 4 children were behind him. He was weeping. The generals who had come to see him off were weeping. The plan, as it was presented to the public, was a temporary departure, a rest, a medical trip, a pause. Everyone on that runway knew it was a lie. The family boarded the plane. Reza was 18, Farah was 15, Ali-Reza was 12, Leila was 8. They carried what they could. They left behind everything else: the palace, the gardens, the schools, the staff, the country that had been their families for 37 years. Leila brought a doll. She did not understand what was happening. None of the younger children did. They had been told they were going on a trip. What followed was not exile in any dignified sense. It was rejection. The Pahlavis moved from country to country like refugees, with a title but no welcome. Morocco took them briefly as a courtesy to the Shah's friendship with King Hassan II. The Bahamas allowed a short stay. Mexico offered temporary shelter. Panama was arranged through back channels. At each stop, the family waited for someone, anyone, to offer them a permanent home. No one did. The allies who had attended the Persepolis celebrations, who had toasted the Shah and traded arms and signed contracts, now refused to take his phone calls. The United States, the country that had helped restore the Shah to power in 1953, would not let him stay. While the family moved from place to place, the Shah was dying. He had been quietly diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma years before the revolution, a secret kept from all but a handful of advisors. His health was collapsing as fast as his political power. By the time Egyptian President Anwar Sadat offered the family permanent refuge in Cairo, the Shah could barely stand. On July 27, 1980, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi died in a Cairo military hospital. He was 60 years old. Farah was 41. She had been married to him for 20 years, and she had spent the last 18 months watching him be refused by every country he had once considered an ally, while his body consumed itself from the inside. The children stood at their father's funeral in Cairo, a state funeral hosted by Sadat, attended by Richard Nixon, held in a country that was not theirs, for a king whose kingdom no longer existed. Reza was 19, Ali-Reza was 14, Leila was 10. She had lost her country at 8 and her father at 10. She had not yet begun to understand what either loss would cost her. After the Shah's death, the family settled in the United States. President Ronald Reagan granted them entry in 1981, and Farah divided her life between a house near Washington, D.C. and an apartment in Paris. The 4 children grew up scattered, different schools, different cities, different countries, held together by a mother who was trying to keep a family intact while the world they had come from burned behind them. Reza, the eldest, carried the title. He was crown prince of a country that no longer had a crown, and he accepted the weight of that contradiction earlier than any of his siblings. He trained as a fighter pilot. He settled near Washington. In 1986, he married Yasmin Etemad Amini, a lawyer, and they had 3 daughters, Noor, Iman, and Farah. He became the public voice of the family, calling for secular democracy in Iran, appearing on television, issuing statements, attending summits. He was the one who faced the cameras. He was the one who kept insisting that the story was not over. Farinaz, the eldest daughter, chose the opposite. She moved to New York and disappeared from public life almost entirely. She never married. She gave no interviews. She made no public statements. Of the 4 children, she is the one the world knows the least about. And that appears to be exactly how she wants it. The exile did not make her angry or political. It made her silent. Ali-Reza was the scholar. He earned a degree from Princeton, a master's from Columbia, and was working toward a PhD at Harvard in ancient Iranian studies and philology, the languages and history of the Persian Empire. He was studying the very civilization his family once claimed to rule, reading about the kings his father had compared himself to, reconstructing a world he had been locked out of since he was 12 years old. He was brilliant, private, and increasingly unreachable. He lived alone in Boston. He never married. He was once voted one of the world's most eligible princes. He spent his days with books about a country he could not enter, and his nights in an apartment where neighbors said the shades were always drawn. Leila was the youngest and the most fragile. She had been 8 years old on the tarmac. She attended school in New York, graduated from Rye Country Day School in 1988, and studied literature and philosophy at Brown University. She spoke 5 languages. She modeled briefly for Valentino in Paris. She was beautiful in the particular way that photographs cannot quite contain. Vivid, restless, searching for something that kept moving out of reach. She suffered from anorexia nervosa, depression, chronic insomnia, and chronic fatigue syndrome. The family said the illness began with the exile. The doctors said it began in her body. The truth was probably both. A girl who lost her country before she understood what a country was, and whose body became the place where that loss expressed itself. Leila Pahlavi was born on March 27, 1970, inside a palace in Tehran. She was the baby of the family, the one everyone held, the one everyone protected, the one who sat on her father's lap in the official photographs and smiled without knowing what any of it meant. She was 8 years old when the revolution took her out of that palace and put her on a plane. She did not choose to leave. She did not understand why she was leaving, and she spent the rest of her life trying to survive a loss she had never been given the chance to refuse. After the family settled in the United States, Leila was enrolled at the United Nations International School in New York. She later attended Rye Country Day School in Westchester County, graduating in 1988. She spoke Persian, English, and French fluently, with some Spanish and Italian. She enrolled at Brown University to study literature and philosophy. Some accounts say she graduated. Others say she left before finishing, her health already failing. The anorexia had started in her teens. It was not a phase. It was a condition that consumed her for the rest of her life, a slow, methodical destruction of her own body that no amount of treatment could stop. She was hospitalized. She was treated. She relapsed. The cycle repeated for years. Alongside the eating disorder came depression, chronic insomnia so severe that she could not sleep without medication, and a fatigue that left her unable to function for days at a time. She was prescribed barbiturates for the insomnia. She became dependent on them. The dependency deepened into addiction. For a brief period, she modelled for Valentino in Paris. There is something almost unbearable about that detail. A young woman whose body was being destroyed by starvation,
photographed in couture, because she was beautiful enough to sell it. The fashion world saw a face. The family saw a daughter disappearing. Farah later said that Leila could not stand living far from Iran. She said her youngest daughter shared wholeheartedly the suffering of her countrymen, that the exile had broken something in her that could not be repaired. Friends described her as warm, vivacious in small groups, deeply loving toward her family, and profoundly, permanently displaced. She lived between Greenwich, Connecticut, and Paris. She was never settled. She was never at rest. She was always somewhere between two places, and belonging to neither. On Sunday, June 10, 2001, Leila's doctor arrived at the Leonard Hotel in London just before 7:30 in the evening. He found her in her room. She was dead. She was 31 years old. The autopsy revealed more than 5 times the lethal dose of Seconal in her blood. She had stolen the pills from her doctor's desk during a previous appointment. A non-lethal quantity of cocaine was also present. Her body, when they found it, was emaciated, hollowed out by years of anorexia and bulimia until there was almost nothing left of the girl who had once sat on the Shah's lap and smiled for the cameras. She was buried at the Cimetière de Passy in Paris, near her maternal grandmother. Not in Tehran, where she was born. Not in Cairo, where her father was entombed. In Paris, a city that was nobody's homeland and everybody's exile. Her brother Reza announced her death in a statement that called it the end of a lengthy illness. The word he did not use was the one everyone understood. Farah said afterward that she would never be free from the grief. She had already lost a husband, a country, and a throne. Now she had lost the child who had been 8 years old on the tarmac, the one who had carried a doll onto the plane, the one who had never been given the chance to say goodbye to the only home she had ever known.
Ali-Reza Pahlavi was born on April 28, 1966, the second son, the quiet one. He was 12 years old when the family left Iran, old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to remember what was being lost, not old enough to do anything about it. He was, by every account, the most intellectually gifted of the 4 children. He attended St. David's School in New York and Mount Greylock Regional High School in Williamstown, Massachusetts. He went to Princeton for his undergraduate degree. He earned a master's at Columbia, and then he entered the PhD program at Harvard, where he studied ancient Iranian philology, the languages, the texts, the inscriptions left behind by the Persian kings who had ruled the same land his family had been driven from. There is something in that choice that is difficult to sit with. A man spending his days inside the history of a civilization he was forbidden to enter, reading about Cyrus and Darius and Xerxes in a library in Cambridge, while the country those kings had built was being governed by men who had made it a criminal offense to support his family. He was reconstructing a world on paper that he could not touch in life. Abbas Milani, the director of Iranian studies at Stanford, later noted that the Shah himself had carried a documented tendency toward depression, described in CIA profiles as Hamlet-like, brooding, melancholic. Ali-Reza appeared to have inherited this temperament and deepened it into something far more consuming. He lived alone in a townhouse on West Newton Street in the South End of Boston. Neighbors knew who he was. They noticed the expensive cars, the fine clothes, the fact that the shades were always pulled down. He rarely spoke to anyone on the street. He never married. He had a companion, Raha Didevar, but he kept even that relationship largely private. He was once listed among the world's most eligible princes. He lived like a man in hiding from a life he could not make fit. The death of his sister Leila in 2001 broke something in him that had already been fracturing for years. A close family friend, Nazi Eftekhari, later said that his depression grew over time. The departure from Iran, the exile, the death of his father, and then Leila, to whom he had been extremely close. Another friend said it more simply. He totally changed after his sister died. He became another person. He never healed. He was trapped in an impossible position. If he stayed silent and lived privately, he was criticized by the exile community for not speaking out. If he became politically active, like his brother Reza, he would be accused of seeking power. So he chose the third option, the one that looks like stillness from the outside and feels like suffocation from the inside. He stayed in Boston. He kept the shades drawn. He read about ancient kings. And he waited for something that was never going to come. On the night of January 4th, 2011, Ali-Reza Pahlavi died in his apartment from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 44 years old. His servant found him the following morning. There was no note that has been made public. His brother, Reza, released a statement saying that Ali-Reza had been deeply disturbed by the ills fallen upon his beloved homeland and had carried the burden of losing a father and a sister in his young life. He had struggled for years to overcome his sorrow. He finally succumbed. His last known wish was that his ashes be scattered in the Caspian Sea, the water that runs along the northern coast of Iran, the sea he had grown up beside, the sea he could see from the palace windows when he was a boy, the sea he was never allowed to touch again. Farah Pahlavi was 72 years old. She had now buried 2 of her 4 children. Her husband was in a tomb in Cairo. Her daughter was in a cemetery in Paris. Her son wanted his remains returned to a body of water inside a country that had made it a crime to speak his family's name with respect. What do you do after you have buried 2 of your children, lost your husband in exile, and been forbidden from returning to the country you once ruled? If you are Farah Pahlavi, you do the only thing left. You keep living. You keep showing up. And you carry all of it without setting any of it down. Farah is 87 years old now. She lives alone in a Paris apartment with a sweeping view across the Seine and the great city landmarks beyond. She also keeps a house near Washington, D.C., where Reza and his family live. She splits her time between the 2 cities, between a son who carries the family's political future and a solitude that belongs only to her. She still attends royal events across Europe, weddings, funerals, coronations, received with the protocol due to a queen, but representing a throne that no longer exists. She is a woman without a country who is still treated like a head of state, which is its own particular kind of loneliness. Every year, the extended Pahlavi family gathers at the Shah's tomb in the Al-Rifai Mosque in Cairo. They pray over a man who died 45 years ago in a country that was not his, for a kingdom that was taken from him by the people he believed he was saving. Farah has made that trip every year. She has never missed it. She told an interviewer in Paris that she misses the warmth of the people, the smell of jasmine, and seeing the snow on the mountains. She said she carries Iran within her the way a woman carries her child. She said she has had a very interesting life, very hard and very beautiful at the same time. She said she wants to keep hope alive and not allow bitterness into her heart, and that she hopes light will overcome darkness. These are the words of a woman who has been practicing survival for so long that the practice has become indistinguishable from the person. She has spoken, carefully, about her regrets as a mother. She has wondered aloud whether her duties as empress consumed time that should have belonged to her children, whether the organizations and the museums and the universities and the state visits took her away from the people who needed her most. Her eldest daughter, Farah answered that question for her once. She told her mother it was your destiny. It is unclear whether Farah found that comforting or devastating. It may have been both. Reza remains the public face of the family. He has 3 daughters. Ali-Reza left behind 1 daughter, born after his death to his companion Raha Didavar. There are grandchildren now who have never seen Iran, who carry a name that is illegal to honor in the country it comes from, who are growing up in Washington and Paris and New York as the 3rd generation of a family that lost everything except the obligation to remember it. When you look at the photograph from January 16, 1979, the family on the tarmac at Mehrabad Airport, the Shah in tears, Farah beside him, 4 children behind them, it does not look the same as it did at the beginning of this story. You can see now what each of those faces was carrying into the future without knowing it. Reza, 18, who would spend the next 4 decades trying to reclaim a country from outside its borders. Farah, 15, who would answer the loss with silence so complete that the world forgot she existed. Ali-Reza, 12, who would spend his life studying an ancient kingdom from a shuttered apartment in Boston until the grief finally consumed him at 44. And Leila, 8, holding a doll, who would never find solid ground again and would be found dead and alone in a London hotel room 22 years later. 2 of those 4 children are gone. Both died outside of Iran. Both are buried in countries that were not their own.
The country they were born in has made it a criminal offense to support the family they belong to. Their father lies in a tomb in Cairo. Their sister lies in a cemetery in Paris. Their brother wanted his ashes scattered in a sea he was never permitted to reach. Empress Farah Pahlavi was crowned Shah Banu in 1967. She was given a crown, a country, and a purpose. The revolution took the crown and the country. The exile took 2 of her children. What it could not take, what 46 years of displacement and grief and loss have not been able to take, is the woman who remains. Alone in a Paris apartment, overlooking a river that is not the Caspian, surrounded by photographs of a life that was taken from her before she was old enough to understand it was not permanent. She said she still hopes to go home. She said it will happen soon. She has been saying it for 46 years, and she has not stopped believing it, which is either the most extraordinary act of faith in modern royal history or the saddest, and it may be both. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe so you never miss another one.